Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell, coming to you on Thursday, October 23rd in the evening. Yes, we didn't do an earlier show this week. We had some scheduling conflicts. Obviously, again, if you know me, NBA season starting. I cover the Atlanta Hawks. It's been incredibly busy. So just getting a preview episode today. We are going to kind of weave in some ACC and playoff talk as we do this, to kind of make up for it. But that's the reason we didn't have an earlier episode this week. But appreciate anybody tuning in to listen to us preview the game against Syracuse, homecoming weekend. Hope to see everybody out there. But before we get into everything, RJ, how you doing, man?
Feeling great. Another week as one of the only undefeated teams in college football. How great is that? We get to talk Georgia Tech football another week. So it's incredible.
Absolutely. 7-0, ranked number 7 in the country.
hmm
Opportunity to keep winning. First time, like if Georgia Tech wins, first time they would ever start 5-0 in conference play. This has been a very good start to the season. Some records being broken, and they have an opportunity to continue doing that. But before we get into that, obviously, guys, if you're watching this, haven't subscribed, would love it if you would give the channel a sub, hit that notification bell so you know when our new content goes live. Follow us wherever you get podcasts, like the video, all that kind of good stuff. We really appreciate everything, guys. Hey, rolling, keep winning, possible playoff berth, ACC championship. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves, but there could be a lot of cool things to talk about down the line if they can keep winning. So appreciate you guys' support for all that. Before we get into anything, obviously RJ was not able to join the instant reaction show. That was me in my car in some parking garage in Durham. I guess to kind of put a pin on the Duke game, what were your thoughts on just the game overall, and just anything you wanted to add to the discussion before we move on to Syracuse?
Yeah, it was kind of weird to me. I mean, it very much was a tale of two halves. But when you talk about that first half, like Duke shot themselves in the foot. Georgia Tech, very much, took advantage of some opportunities that they were given. The offense wasn't necessarily clicking, and then you talk about that second half, specifically the fourth quarter. Haynes King, again, as we've seen in a million games, put the team on his back. Georgia Tech is a second half team, and the one reason why is because you have a second half quarterback in Haynes King. Uh, Willed Georgia Tech to a win and kind of silenced all the talk of, Duke might win, Duke's favored, everybody's picking against Georgia Tech. Was all silenced in one quarter, but I will say they're, take with the win what you will. Duke played very well that game. You got outgained by Duke and still won that game, but again, you're 7-0, no place to complain.
No, you're right about that. 7-0 is 7-0, no matter how you cut it, and that's. I don't think people like Tech fans obviously do, but I don't think enough people nationally who I just see a lot of people gloss over Georgia Tech. Well, 7-0, they've barely been able to scrape by in some games. Like, look at what happens around the country each week and tell me you can't appreciate what Georgia Tech is doing. Like, we've seen we've seen upsets of massive point spreads. So we'll kind of get into playoff and ACC talk, but I think we kind of spoke into existence what happened last week. Some of the things that happened, what did we say heading into the week? Is we thought, okay, 5 playoff spots might be locked up. We thought Ohio State would go undefeated. We thought Indiana would go undefeated in the regular season. Those two would play. Both would make it. Miami goes 12-0. Texas Tech would go 12-0. And then you have whoever wins the G5 spot. Miami loses Friday night. Texas Tech loses Saturday. So we look stupid for saying that. And that it just goes to show you, there's been a lot that's going on in college football this year. And I just think people that are not Georgia Tech fans should kind of relax a little bit and just appreciate a team finding ways to win. Miami couldn't find a way to win as a nearly 3-score favorite. Texas Tech couldn't find a way to win despite being a near double-digit favorite against a team that lost by 32 the week before. I know Sam Levitt didn't play against Utah, but my point stands. Texas Tech looked like a wagon heading into that game. And you know what? They didn't win. I think it should be appreciated more, I think, than what it's being just nationally.
Yeah, and you talk about national media talks about, oh yeah, Georgia Tech's beat the teams that they've supposed to beat. They've done what they've supposed to do. Um, and you kind of glaze over that fact. But when you go back and look at previous Georgia Tech teams and look at, just Georgia Tech in the past 10 years, like this is an unreal run that Georgia Tech has been on. Like this is not the Georgia Tech of old. There hasn't been any slip ups at all in the schedule. You're doing more than just beating the teams you're supposed to beat. I mean, you were an underdog uh, to Duke. A lot of people were picking Duke. This Georgia Tech team has gone above and beyond, and I think kind of the national sentiment is, oh, they haven't really played anybody. Oh, they're not really doing this much. As a Georgia Tech team, this is quite an accomplishment, and I think that just goes to show kind of what Brett Key has done, going literally from bottom to top in a short period of time.
And this point's been made by people a lot smarter than me. But concerning the parity of college football and kind of like the NFL style, like, hey, anybody can beat anybody on a given Saturday. Like, yeah, maybe UMass can't beat Alabama, but like generally a lot of these Power Four teams, like sometimes there's not a lot of separation, and you're seeing that. And look, it's hard to go out and beat. I know Ohio State's doing it, but like it's hard to go out and beat teams even if you're favored by a lot, like winning 45-0 every week or winning 42-7 or 38-0. Like that's a hard thing to do. And like Georgia Tech is winning, they're finding ways to win, and like that to me should not go overlooked. We've still got a little ways to go before we get playoff rankings in. I think less than 2 weeks. I think Tech plays Syracuse and NC State before the first playoff rankings come out. So a chance to reach 9-0. And then ultimately, obviously, the AP, you care about it for only so long, and then, the playoff rankings are going to take over. But I guess before we get into Syracuse today, I guess let's kind of, since we missed our earlier week episode, kind of talk about the lay of the ACC, kind of how it looks right now, and kind of it's a mess, like to say the least. Look, they're Georgia Tech, Virginia, SMU, all undefeated in conference play. This could be a wild November because I think the theme for me this week in the ACC is like, don't stub your toe. It's don't stub your toe Saturday. I'm going to make that a real thing now. Look, Cal plays Virginia Tech. Why am I bringing that up? Virginia Tech's been horrendous, but Cal actually only has one ACC loss. Like they are still technically alive in this thing. And again, we talked about them a couple weeks ago as a team. Like you could look up in the middle of November and you're like, they're 7-2. That's weird. And, you remember the San Diego State loss, or you remember they about got by North Carolina, which is interesting. And they're actually underdogs against Virginia Tech tomorrow night. If they lose that game, you can pretty much like toss them in the trash can. But you still technically have to talk about them, even though I think we would both agree they haven't exactly been super impressive.
Yeah, and it's so funny to me to talk about a 5-2 ACC Cal team being touchdown underdogs to 2-5 Virginia Tech on the road. Like this just feels like a matchup that shouldn't even happen. But they're still in it, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Again, some of the favorites this week. So going to Saturday, look, Georgia Tech's a 17.5-point favorite against Syracuse. Virginia is a double-digit favorite in Chapel Hill. SMU actually only a very, very slight favorite on the road at Wake Forest. I think that's maybe the most interesting game in the ACC this weekend. NC State at Pitt, I think that's another one to keep your eye on. Look, Pitt still only has one conference loss. We thought they might be in a bit of a trap spot against Syracuse last week, but that was a bad football game. We'll talk a little bit about it later when we get into Syracuse. But Stanford at Miami. Look, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth again. Obviously, like we kind of really talked about Miami in a strong line. I still think Miami's very good. They're obviously not unbeatable. They're 30-point favorites against Stanford. Like it would be like the upset of all upsets if they lost this weekend. So fully expect them to not stub their toe. Look, Louisville is playing the perfect game after a game like that. They get Boston College in Louisville. They're like 25-point favorites. Again, it's don't stub your toe Saturday. Look, don't lose a game you shouldn't and mess up the ACC race because, look, let me pull up the standings real quick. You have Georgia Tech at the top. They're unbeaten in conference play, 4-0. Virginia and SMU both 3-0, and then you have Pitt, Duke, Louisville, Cal, and Miami all with one loss. Not all those teams are going to play each other. So it's just going to be a very crazy next few weeks, I think, to say. Look, you'll get Virginia plays Duke, Miami, SMU is going to be a massive game. There's just a lot that still has to be sorted out. But it's not as clear as it looked, if Miami had beaten Louisville, because, me and you were talking about that. Like, if Miami beat Louisville, you give them a second conference loss, and they wouldn't have tiebreakers over Miami or Virginia. Tech would still be undefeated. But, if Tech beat Duke, and it's like, okay, Tech, Virginia, Miami, but now Miami has a loss, and it's very interesting. It's going to be a crazy next 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, and you're in a really weird spot too. Like, you look at the odds before this week. I think Miami was an odds-on favorite. Like, am I right about that? Like minus 120 or something like that. Now you're tied with Georgia Tech plus 250. And there's 5 teams at the top who all have very realistic, very probable paths to the top, like SMU, Louisville, Virginia, Georgia Tech, Miami. They're all still pretty high in the odds for ACC championship game, and I could justify any, one out of those 5 winning the ACC championship or making the ACC championship. It's just the road is so blurry. Every team has a ton of different paths, and you don't really know what's going to happen. And that's why we love ACC football.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you ready to get into Syracuse?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the Orange. Look, these two teams, this is the 3rd straight year they've met. Key faced him in his first full season as the head coach. Most of y'all will remember that as the game where they got bowl eligible for the first time under Brent Key. It had been the first time they had been bowl eligible since 2018. That was a very strange game. It was the last game, one of the last games Dino Babers coached at Syracuse. They literally didn't have a quarterback in that game. They were having to use tight end as a wildcat, and just it was – I felt bad for him, honestly. It was just a very tough situation to put in, but Tech got the win, controlled the game. From what I like, that's not a game like I have just glued my memory, but it's one I remember just a little bit. And then last year, look, we all remember last year, whether you remember the Fran Browns stuff or whatever. Tech was 2-0 heading into that game. They were ranked 23rd, ranked for the first time under Brent Key, and then just ran into the perfect opponent. Look, for Tech's weaknesses last year, Syracuse had the exact strengths to match up with that. It was a really bad day for the Georgia Tech defense. They made a late run, but just the middle of that game was just really bad. They almost were able to get right back in it, and then a couple of late conversions on 3rd down for Syracuse put the game away. It was just a massive day for Kyle McCord, Rondé Gadsden. Look, that whole offense just last year. This year, a little bit of a different story. This is nowhere close to the same Syracuse team. Like we talked about it a little bit in the preseason. Like, this was going to be a team that had a lot of turnover. Look, Kyle McCord's gone. LaQuint Allen, their running back last year, is gone. Trevor Pena transferred to Penn State. Rondé Gadsden left. Just a lot of guys were gone. Even some of the defensive guys. You kept your offensive coordinator. They have one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. Like, he does a great job scheming up stuff, using the players that they have and the personnel that they have to their strengths. Was just an excellent hire by Fran Brown. Now they brought in Notre Dame transfer Steve Angeli. He was playing really, really well. Had an Achilles injury against Clemson, out for the season, and it has just not gone well for them since. Look, they started out, they were 3-1. They had an early season loss to Tennessee, beat UConn in overtime, beat Colgate, then went on the road and beat Clemson the week after Clemson lost to Georgia Tech. They were 3-1. It was kind of at least looking like, hey, maybe Syracuse can get to a bowl game, and technically they still can. But it's been a tough watch the past few weeks, and I feel for them. They've got some injuries and some tough spots. None bigger than quarterback. Look, ever since Angeli went down, they lost 38-3 to Duke, 31-18 to SMU, and 30-13 last week against Pitt. all three games have kind of followed a somewhat similar script. I mean, Duke just jumped on them and just never let up. Like that was a blowout from the start. They had over 500 yards of offense in that game. SMU actually had them down. I want to say a similar score. I think it was 31-3 or something along those lines. Yeah, it was 31-3 in the fourth quarter after SMU scored a touchdown. So there was some window dressing at the end of that game. Like Syracuse got a couple of late touchdowns, only lost by 13. And then last week they were just super turnover prone against Pitt. It was actually kind of a disgusting football game. Like there was 4 total turnovers, 3 by Syracuse. Pitt only had 255 total yards, Syracuse 212. There were 25 combined penalties in that game. Again, look, it was Pitt ended up winning 30-13. It was never really in doubt either. Ever since Angeli went down, they haven't really played a close game. That does not mean they can't beat Georgia Tech. Well, look, I'm gonna actually, it's gonna get old me saying this probably, but I think we already really do say it is anybody can lose anybody in college football right now. Broadly speaking, there are upsets every weekend, whether it's double digit, point upsets, anything like that. You can't take anybody for granted. Although, just been playing these last 3 weeks, Georgia Tech is clearly a better football team.
Yeah, and I think you're at a point for Georgia Tech. I think you're at a point where all of your opponents are going to look at the Georgia Tech game as the Super Bowl, because all of these opponents that you're playing, either struggling in ACC play, they might be out of the ACC championship race. What they're fighting for at the end of the season is just something to add on to the ticker and say, hey, at least we did this. Now let's build on it. Let's add some guys and let's do it again next season. The one thing they're going to want to add to their schedule is, hey, you beat a top 10 Georgia Tech team, towards the end of the year last year. That's what all of these teams are going to want to say. And I think, that's, again, one of these things for Syracuse, a team that, has kind of fallen apart. They don't really have an offense. The defense has struggled too. Special teams has struggled to punt return against Pitt. They're gonna look to games like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess let's kind of get into the matchup a little bit. I'm gonna share my screen right here. Our good friends at Game on Paper. There's a whole lot of purple there. So Syracuse, just statistical profile, 79th points per game, 120th rushing yards per game. They are 14th in passing yards per game. I will say the passing attack has seen a steep drop off ever since Steve Angeli went down. We'll get into it in just a second. They still have dangerous receivers. I think that's actually the thing I'm concerned most. 60th in total yards per game. Defense has been pretty much a disaster this year. 107th in points per game allowed, 79th in rushing yards per game allowed, 126th in passing yards per game allowed, and 115th in total yards per game allowed. Offensively, look, Ricky Collins, LSU transfer, he has taken over for Angeli. 733 yards this season, 5 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He has 3 interceptions in 2 straight games. It's not been great. I think he grades it. I think he just barely above a 50 in PFF in the snaps that he's played since. Look, I don't want to pile on the kid or anything, but this is compared to what Georgia Tech had to face last week. This is a drop off.
Yeah, and this is, this might be one of, I don't want to say one of, this is probably one of the worst pass offenses you played this year. And it's unfortunate for Syracuse because, we talked about them at the beginning of the year. We talked about them, through the first 4 weeks of the season. They did have a really strong pass offense, and a lot of that was Steve Angeli. And then you bring in a backup quarterback, and it hasn't been the same. They still have, I will say, they still have a lot of strong offensive targets on the offense. It's not that's been the problem. It's just you bring in a backup quarterback, it ruins, the continuity of the team, and that's kind of where you see the fall off.
Yeah, and look, I just kind of looking through their offensive profile here. Total EPA 93rd, EPA per play 93rd, EPA per game on offense 93rd, success rate 71st. Now, again, they're 57th in success rate when passing. That was a strength of Georgia Tech's, up till last week. And, we kind of talked about it last week. Hey, we knew Duke's going to get some yards. They're one of the top passing attacks in the country. They're going to get some yards. That was clearly the worst game that Georgia Tech secondary's played. And I think that's the matchup I want to highlight first because, as we know, Amari Harvey, Brent Key announced today, he's still out. Akilo Stone is still out for this week, and so is Miles Forrestall. One big thing I wanted to talk about was Jai Gilmore is also questionable. Now, he made several good pass breakups and some really good plays from his nickel spot last week. If you're down a couple of starters in the secondary, like I know Collins hasn't been very good, but with some of their receivers are still, pretty solid. Look, Jonte Cook, 37 catches, 456 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's still the top target for Ricky Collins. Darrell Gill, 21 catches, over 370 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's averaging nearly 18 yards per catch. Like, that's something that definitely needs to be pointed out. I hope I'm pronouncing some of these names right. Apologies if not. Their tight end, Dan Villari, 30 catches, 330 yards. Justice Ross Simmons, 18 catches, 294 yards, 5 touchdowns, over 16 yards per catch. If you have some bust in coverage, it's going to be on Ricky Collins to hit them, but we've seen it. And look, if Georgia Tech, if Gilmore doesn't play, you're going to be down, 2 of your top DBs. That would make me nervous a little bit. Just like these playmakers are pretty good. I'm not trying to pile on Ricky Collins. I think you've seen the drop off in quality of quarterback play with, some of the numbers. Like it's just there. And he's turned the ball over a lot.
Yeah, well, and that's what we saw, last year. Obviously, they had Kyle McCord in that game. But, last year in the Syracuse game, what you saw was, a couple of injuries in, the Georgia Tech secondary. And you saw Syracuse, able to throw the ball at will almost, it felt in that game. A lot of passes over the middle, over the linebackers, forcing linebackers to be in coverage. Obviously Jeff Nixon, the offensive coordinator at Syracuse, like he will be able to scheme something up. It's just a matter of can you actually make that pass when given the opportunity? Because I do think Georgia Tech's, in comparison to last year, I think their pass defense is a lot stronger. But if you do end up being without, Jai Gilmore, I mean, I think he was the leading tackler last week too as well. He plays such a big role in this defense, and losing a lot of guys in the secondary, I don't want to say it's the most important position on defense because I think linebacker is, but I think when you start to pull in, from depth guys at secondary, that's when it can start to get ugly for a defense.
Yeah, and again, we don't know if Jai Gilmore is going to be out. He's questionable.
Yeah.
As Malik Rutherford and Harrison Moore. We'll get into that more when we talk about the offensive side of the ball. But it's definitely notable. And look, Syracuse has not been able to run the ball at all. They usually use 2 backs. Yasin Willis, 353 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaging 3.9 yards a carry. Will Nixon, 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.7 yards per carry. You look at some of the advanced numbers here. Total EPA when running the ball, 109th. EPA per play when running the ball, 106th. EPA per game, 107th. And only 88th in success rate when rushing the ball. Now, Georgia Tech put together their best effort in rush defense last week. Brent Key was very complimentary of the guys this week, and that was especially impressive with Akilo Stone still out. And Duke had been running the ball really well with Nate Shepard. They just didn't have any big runs. Look, you're not facing as talented of a backfield this week, but they still have to play well. Look, I can't sit here and say I fully trust Georgia Tech's run defense yet, because I will point out, Ricky Collins isn't a mobile quarterback, but they run him a little bit more. He has 19 carries in the past 2 games. He has 30 carries for I think it's 102 yards overall. He's not a running quarterback, but he has athleticism, and they could use him in some ways to try to open up some things in the run game for Syracuse because, look, Virginia Tech was able to run the ball well on Georgia Tech, with the threat of Kyron Jones. Marcellus Hawkins was really good in that game. And then, against Wake Forest, Robbie Ashford was really good. Damon Claiborne had a really nice day. You still just have to play sound, do things well. This has not been a good rushing attack. They turn the ball over a ton on offense. You just can't allow that.
Yeah, I think the one big key to this game, uh, at least when it comes to defense for Georgia Tech, is I think if you just are able to limit the big plays that you might have out of this Syracuse offense, I think you will be fine. Uh, the thing is, they do have playmakers everywhere, but if you don't allow them, to keep having these drives, if you force Ricky Collins to pass the ball again and again and again and again, there's a reason why there's more interceptions than touchdowns that he's thrown this year. And I think if you get him into that type of position, I mean, put yourself in a good position to win.
Yep, I agree. Look, I still think overall the key is going to be no busted coverages, winning on early downs, and trying to find a way to pressure and get Ricky Collins to make mistakes because he will do it. It's again 3 interceptions in 2 straight games. This isn't as long as you don't give him anything easy and you tackle well. That's the other thing. I talked about it in the instant reaction last week that early in the game, Duke was just going to their quick game a lot, and Georgia Tech wasn't tackling well. They did that better in the second half. Look, guys like Jonte Cook and Justice Ross Simmons, like those guys can scoot. And if you don't tackle well, like that's how you can turn what looks like a simple play that might gain 2 or 3 yards, or maybe a little bit more, into like a 55-yard gain or a touchdown or something like that. Like tackling, I think, is going to be paramount. I think forcing Ricky Collins into mistakes, I think, is going to be right up there as well.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, you got to play good on crucial downs. We talked about that a lot going into the Duke game, and I think the Georgia Tech defense did a really good job against that. Against Duke was timely defense. As long as you play that against Syracuse, again, I don't want to demean Syracuse as an opponent, but I think there's levels to this offense, and as long as you play timely defense, don't have mistakes in the red zone, mistakes that are super costly at the wrong time, I think you should be fine.
Yep, agreed. Look, they haven't played well at all since Angeli went out. Again, they only scored 3 points against Duke. It was 31-3 against SMU when they put a couple touchdowns on the board. They barely got over 200 yards last week against Pitt. It just hasn't been the same, since he went down. It doesn't mean you can slack off or not respect your opponent, but again, I think you have the advantage here. This is not a great offense if you don't have any busted coverages and you just stick to your assignments and you tackle well. So flipping over to the other side, I think is the biggest advantage in the game. We'll kind of go through Syracuse's defensive numbers. I already kind of read them off, but it's even worse when you kind of look under the hood a little bit here. Look, 98th in total EPA allowed on defense, EPA per play allowed, 92nd, 97th EPA allowed per game, and they are 124th in success rate allowed. Their passing defense has really struggled this season. 122nd in passing success rate allowed. They're 94th in rushing success rate allowed. It's just been pretty bad all year around. And look, now you have to deal with Buster Faulkner, Haynes King, and this Georgia Tech offense. So,
Yeah, I do share a similar sentiment, but I will say the Syracuse defense, and again, I know looking at the box score, it's going to tell a different story. But the run defense has been better for Syracuse. I mean, they've averaged, or their opponents have averaged 2.7 yards per carry in 2 consecutive games. But I think a lot of that just comes from the score or the deficit that they're in being so big that the team that they're playing, is going to run the ball a lot, and that, causes a lot of predictability. But I also do think the run defense just has clamped down a little bit. Like, they do have a lot of very good players on the defense, like Raheem Long Jr. Has got 2 TFLs, 31 tackles on the year. Gary Bryant in the linebacker position. I think they do have guys. It's just a matter of, I don't think you can stop a Buster Faulkner offense, and I don't think there's a lot of defenses in the country that can do it, and I don't think Syracuse has proved to me in any way that, they can be one of those.
yeah. I mean, Georgia Tech, it looks really good on offense. Look, I know they, were a little bit inefficient in the first half, and look, you can't have those kind of big gaps in this game. But look, 31st in total EPA on offense, 31st in EPA per play, 31st in EPA per game, 29th overall in success rate. Look, they don't pass obviously as much as they run, but they're 28th in total EPA when passing, 37th in passing success rate, 29th in rushing success rate. Everything is pretty good on offense, but we saw it again last week where the week before against Virginia Tech, it was you had a big Malachi Hosley game. You didn't have as much with Haynes King running the ball, but like last week, it kind of reverted to the running backs couldn't find anything going, and really the only running you had was with Haynes King. Obviously, if Malik Rutherford isn't able to go, I think you're going to see more Bailey Stockton and Jordan Allen in this game. We saw Jordan Allen play a little bit last week. We've been talking about him since fall camp. Just blazing speed, true freshman receiver, played at Buford High School. I think he's really got a bright future in the Georgia Tech offense. I think you're going to see him more this week if Malik can't go. But look, same thing, if Harrison doesn't play, look, I think you're just going to get Tana at center. And then, the rest of the offensive line is still going to look the same. Ethan, Joe Fusile, Keelan, Malachi Carney. We've seen the tight ends get a lot more involved here over the past couple weeks. Josh Beetham was awesome last week. Harper has had some nice moments. Kind of what are you looking for overall from this offense this week?
Yeah, and you touched on a lot of it. I think the tight ends have been a lot better. I think everything that we were looking for the offense to do in the Duke game, at least in the second half, we saw a lot of it. Like the run game, however you want the run game to work, it depends on the game. It was working. Haynes King is able to find it in some games. But Jamal Haynes still really hasn't gotten, back to the level that we want to see him at. But Malachi Hosley has picked up that slack. He's top three in the country. PFF put out a tweet today. He's top three in the country in rush success rate out of all running backs. Like he's very much a legitimate guy back there, a legitimate threat. Him and Haynes both have a considerable amount of rush yards at this point in the year. I think a lot of it is just going to be who's going to step up in this game. You don't really know heading into any Georgia Tech game for the most part, but I think you might see a little bit less of the Haynes King run. I think this is the game where you got to go establish, Jamal in the backfield. You got to go establish Malachi Hosley in the backfield. And that's really what I'm looking for, especially, if Malik can't go. I can't imagine they're going to be passing the ball a ton.
This isn't even meant to be a slide at Malik in like any possible way, but like I don't think just the passing success depends just solely on whether he plays. Look, you've got Rivers, you've got Canyon. We've seen, Haynes King trust Bailey Stockton. We've seen Jordan Allen get some things going. To me, the biggest thing here is keeping Haynes King clean and no turnovers. Again, we have to talk about just your standard recipe for a big college football upset or any college football upset is no turnovers and just no big plays. And they've done a good job on offense of just, the past couple weeks is, no early turnovers, nothing like this, nothing like that in the game. Look, you had a slow start last week. They just couldn't get anything going. And I think I talked about it in the instant reaction. Look, I think sometimes there's some predictability in certain situations. I'm not saying you should totally abandon the screen game or totally abandon, the fake pitch, quarterback counter. But there just has to, I think, break some tendencies a little bit and keep Syracuse on their toes. I think is, I guess, my way of saying that.
Yeah, and I think one thing I really want to see in this game is start early. Like I don't want it to be third or fourth quarter and Syracuse is still kind of knocking at the door. Like, maybe it's a touchdown lead, maybe it's a little bit closer than you think you should. Um, I think my big thing is just pile on the points early, just so you don't have to run Haynes King later into the game, just so you don't have to, uh, put a lot of emphasis on these later drives when you don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So All right. Well, I guess that kind of brings us to it. Look, I think we both agree that Georgia Tech is the significantly better team here. That now they have to go out and play like it, continue the home dominance. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, it's big favorites week in the ACC. Talk about all the other ACC matchups. That's what I see in this one, and I just don't really see an avenue for Syracuse to win this game. Their offense hasn't wowed me at all in the past 3 weeks. They've struggled on all three phases. Special teams, defense haven't really been competitive in any of these games. And I could see Georgia Tech running away with this one. So I'm gonna go 35, Georgia Tech, Syracuse 13.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similar. I've got it 34-20. I think it's going to follow a similar script as some of the past weeks. I think they will get up early on Syracuse. I think it's going to be like 34-7 or something going into the fourth, and I do think Syracuse probably will get a few extra touchdowns to kind of make it look a little bit better and cover. But again, I think the start of this game is going to be super important because, again, Jeff Nixon is a fantastic offensive coordinator. And I think he can scheme some stuff up and really, bring some stuff early to the game that maybe Georgia Tech's not ready for. And look, Georgia Tech has to be ready for that, especially if Jai Gilmore doesn't play. Look, you're talking about relying on some guys. Welcome back. They've played a lot of guys in the secondary, but again, Syracuse, their weapons aren't as good as last year's. It's a clear downgrade, but they're still dangerous. Look, they can still burn you for a deep pass, or hey, maybe they hit a screen, or maybe they hit a play action or something, and they get him out in the flat and get him in some space, and like the tackling's important. I think Blake Gideon has shown a good job of adjusting, and I think that's going to be super important in this game because, I think Syracuse is going to try to throw some haymakers early because, look, I'm at the risk of sticking my foot in my mouth again. If Syracuse wants to go to a bowl game, look, they still play Boston College and they still play North Carolina. I think they probably win those games. You got to get one more out of Miami, Notre Dame, and Georgia Tech. I think they are going to view this as the one that they can get more so than those two. Again, that's not meant to say anything negative towards anybody or anything. I think that's just going to be how they view it. And I think you're just going to get every bit of what they have. You would get it anyway because you're the number 7 team in the country and you're 7-0, and this is a huge ACC game for you. But look, they're going to go all out to try to win this game. Stuff early, don't turn the ball over, and just control it with Jeff Nixon and that offense. That's kind of how they operate. Georgia Tech doesn't really do that. We'll see how it goes, but I like Georgia Tech to win 34-20. I'm just going to kind of go with what Syracuse has done the past couple of weeks, get a backdoor cover in there. But I think Tech moves to 8-0.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, if this week goes how we think, it's another week of Georgia Tech being on top, and that's another reason to celebrate.
Yep. Anything you think we missed or anything people might yell at us for missing?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. But if we did miss anything, please yell at us.
Yeah.
Like that we want you to, because we don't want to miss anything. We want this to be the best show possible for you guys. So that's going to do it for this one. We will be back, or one of us will be back on Saturday for instant reaction. It's going to be a really long day for me. I've got Georgia Tech, Syracuse at noon. Hawks host the Thunder on Saturday night, so it's going to be a caffeine-fueled day for me. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Whether you're listening to it tonight, on your way to work tomorrow, on your way back from work tomorrow, whatever you like to do, we really appreciate you guys. It means the world to us. Come out and enjoy homecoming Saturday. Hope to see you guys there. If you see me, let me know. But again, subscribe to the channel if you hadn't already. Hit that notification bell to know when our new content goes live. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends. Tell anybody, any Georgia Tech fans you know about us. We would appreciate it. And we will catch you guys on Saturday.